The night was a cloak I wore comfortably, the darkness a companion I had long since befriended. My name is Alex Mercer, and if you're reading this, well, let's just say you've stumbled upon the journal of one of the last zombie hunters in this godforsaken city. I remember the night clearly. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a constant in the hellscape that New York had become. The undead, they weren't the slow, dragging corpses from your grandpa's horror flicks. No, these bastards were something else, fast, smart, and as deadly as the plague they carried. I had made a name for myself taking them down, one silent kill at a time. That night, my contact buzzed me with a new contract. Routine stuff, or so it seemed. One target, isolated. Should be a cakewalk for you, Mercer, he had said. I should have known better. In our world, the word cakewalk was as extinct as the living who used to say it. I geared up, checking my blades and guns with a practiced ease. My reflection in the cracked mirror showed a man with eyes too old for his age, the scars mapping my skin a testament to the life I led. I left my safe house, a fortified apartment high above the ground, the city's screams far below, a symphony of the damned that no longer fazed me. The target was in the meatpacking district, an area I knew like the back of my hand. The streets were eerily silent as I moved, a shadow among shadows. The building was ahead, a decrepit warehouse that had seen better days. I slipped inside, my boots silent on the dusty floor. I found the target, all right. But it wasn't alone. I was ambushed, a dozen pairs of glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. My heart raced, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the hunt. This was no setup by the undead, they had no such wit. This was human treachery, a betrayal that stung sharper than any blade. As I fought, my mind raced back to the beginning, to the days when the outbreak first hit, to the family I lost and the humanity I shed. Each swing, each shot, was a note in the requiem of my past, a dance with death I had mastered. But this was just the overture, the opening act of my descent into a nightmare I had yet to understand. As I cut down the last of the ambushers, my breaths coming in ragged gasps, I knew this night would be a turning point. I was no longer the hunter. I was the hunted, and so, my story begins. The warehouse loomed before me, a skeletal structure of rusted metal and broken windows. I had been here before, back when the world was alive and this place thrummed with the heartbeat of industry. Now, it was just another tomb. I checked my gear one last time. Knives strapped to my thighs, pistols loaded, and my trusty rifle slung across my back. I wasn't just a hunter, I was an arsenal walking into the mouth of madness. The intel was supposed to be solid. One target, they said. Easy in, easy out. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew I'd been sold a lie. The darkness was thick, almost tangible, and it wasn't empty. Eyes watched me, dozens of them, reflecting the little light that dared to penetrate their domain. I moved silently, every sense strained to its limit. The first one came at me fast, a blur of motion. I reacted out of instinct, blade meeting flesh, a dance I had performed 1,000 times. But this was no ordinary zombie. It dodged, it learned, and it damn near got me. The ambush was swift, a hurricane of bodies and gnashing teeth. I fought like a man possessed, because that's what you do when death comes knocking, you invite it in and offer it a drink. I remembered then, as I fought, how I became what I was. The outbreak had taken everything from me, my family, my future, everything but my will to survive. I became a hunter not out of choice, but necessity. And in a world gone mad, necessity is the only currency that matters. As I put down another of the creatures, its blood painting the floor beneath us, I realized the truth. This was no random attack. This was personal. Someone wanted me dead, someone with power, someone who knew just how to hit me where it hurt. I made it out by the skin of my teeth, the warehouse now a pyre behind me, burning with the bodies of the dead. I was bleeding, a gash on my side a stark reminder that I was still alive. For now. The city was quiet as I made my way to my safe house, a silence that screamed in my ears. I had been betrayed, and in this new world, Betrayal was a death sentence I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. The safe house was a shadow of comfort in a city that had forgotten what that word meant. I kicked the door closed behind me, the lock clicking like the chamber of a gun. It was the only sound in the room until my breath joined it, ragged and desperate. Sarah was there, her eyes as hard as the steel in her hands. She didn't need to ask, the blood on my clothes spoke louder than any debrief ever could. It was a setup, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. She nodded, her face grim. Not just any setup, Alex. It's him. The name that came next was a bullet straight to my gut. Mike. The comrade I'd once trusted with my life, now the architect of my near demise. The revelation twisted in me like a knife. How? The question was a whisper, a plea for some sense in the chaos. Sarah's eyes didn't waver. He's changed, Alex. He's not the man we knew. He's evolved. They call him a smart zombie, but he's more than that. He's leading them. The room spun, and I wasn't sure if it was from the blood loss or the betrayal. Mike, who had stood by me through hell, now leading the very monsters we'd sworn to destroy. It was a cruel joke, and I wasn't laughing. Why? It was the only word I could muster. Survival, she said, as if that one word explained the madness of the world. He thinks he's protecting his new kind. I laughed, a sound that was more sob than humor. By killing his old kind? We have to stop him, Alex. Before he tears down everything we've fought for. The weight of my rifle was suddenly comforting in my hands. Then we hunt. We moved through the city as ghosts, the echo of our footsteps a reminder that we were still alive. The hunt was on, but the roles had reversed. The hunter had become the hunted, and I was caught in the middle, a man torn between two worlds. Mike had been my partner, my friend. But the man I knew was gone, replaced by a creature that wore his face and wielded his memories like weapons. I had to end this, for both our sakes. The trail led us to the heart of the city, where the shadows grew long and the dead walked freely. We were close, I could feel it. Close to the man who had been my brother in arms, close to the monster he had become. And when we finally faced him, I knew that the world I had known was gone. In its place was something new, something terrifying. Something that had to be stopped. The city was a labyrinth of death, each turn a gamble between life and the undead. Sarah and I moved through the streets, our steps silent, our breaths measured. We were hunters once more, but this time, our prey was one of our own. The smart zombies had a pattern, a method to their madness that Mike had instilled. They were organized, strategic, and lethal. We tracked them, Sarah and I, following the breadcrumbs of chaos they left in their wake. We found them in the heart of the city, where the skyscrapers reached for a sky choked with despair. The hordes roamed, their movements orchestrated by an unseen conductor. And there, atop the ruins of a once proud building, stood Mike. Recognition flickered in his dead eyes when he saw us. There was no warmth there, no flicker of the camaraderie we once shared. Only the cold calculus of survival. Mike, I called out, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. This ends now. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The horde turned as one, a wave of decay and destruction ready to crash down upon us. The fight was a symphony of horror. Sarah and I, back to back, firing, moving, a dance of death honed by years of survival. The zombies fell, but they kept coming, relentless. And then it was just him. Mike. The hunter turned hunted. The brother turned betrayer. He moved with a grace that belied his monstrous form, a predator in the truest sense. Our battle was silent but for the clash of wills, the grunts of exertion, the symphony of a fight to the death. The city lay silent around us, the horde dispatched, the leader fallen. Sarah's hand found my shoulder, a wordless comfort in a world where words had lost their meaning. We were hunters. But in that moment, I wasn't sure who the real monsters were. Blood dripped from my hands, staining the concrete with the story of tonight's horror. Mike, the leader of the smart zombies, stood before me, a grotesque mirror reflecting my own potential fate. "You don't understand, Alex." Mike's voice was a guttural echo of the man he once was. "We're not the monsters. We never were." His words cut through the fog of war that clouded my mind. The memories of countless hunts, the faces of the undead I had dispatched without a second thought, they all rushed back to me in a relentless tide. Sarah's grip on her weapon tightened, her eyes never leaving Mike. "Don't listen to him, Alex. He's not human anymore." But was I? The line between man and monster had blurred, smeared by the blood of the countless I had slain in the name of survival. Mike took a step forward, his hands raised in a gesture that seemed almost human. "We wanted peace, Alex. We could have coexisted. But your kind never gave us a chance." I thought of the ambush, the revelation, the hunted becoming the hunter. And now, the hunter stood before his prey, the final act of this macabre play at hand. The standoff stretched on, a single moment of silence in the cacophony of the apocalypse. Then, the world exploded into violence. Mike lunged, a predator striking out with lethal precision. Sarah fired, her shots a staccato rhythm in the night. I moved on instinct, the dance of death as familiar as the heartbeat in my chest. The fight was brutal, unforgiving. We were not just fighting for our lives, but for the very soul of humanity. Each blow I landed on Mike was a question, each parry an answer I was afraid to hear. In the end, it was a knife that decided it. My knife. The blade plunged into Mike's heart, a heart that once beat with human warmth, now cold and unfeeling. He looked at me then, and I saw a glimmer of the man he once was. "You could have been me, Alex," he whispered as he fell. The night reclaimed its silence, the battle over. Sarah approached, her eyes searching mine. "It's done," she said, but her voice was hollow. I looked down at Mike, at the monster he had become, at the friend he had been. The final confrontation was over, but the war within me raged on. Who was the real villain? The zombies fighting for survival, or the hunters fighting to maintain a world that no longer existed? As dawn broke over the city, I knew one thing for certain. The hunt would go on. But whether I would be the hunter or the hunted remained to be seen. The silence of the morning was a stark contrast to the cacophony of last night's violence. I stood over Mike's lifeless body, my mind a whirlwind of memories and blood-soaked images. The sun's rays did little to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Sarah had left, her parting words a soft murmur lost in the wind. "You know where to find me," she had said, but I wasn't sure I'd ever seek her out. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I walked away from the warehouse, the place where the line between hunter and hunted had been irrevocably blurred. The city was waking up, oblivious to the battle that had raged through the night. To them, it was just another day of survival. My communicator buzzed, a stark reminder that the world didn't stop for one man's doubt. A new contract, another target. The cycle was relentless. I paused, my thumb hovering over the device. Mike's words echoed in my head, a haunting refrain. "You could have been me." Could I have? Was there a world where Mike and I stood side by side, fighting for a cause that was more than just survival? A cause that was about living? I turned the communicator off and looked up at the sky. The blue expanse was a canvas of possibilities, a stark contrast to the gray of the city below. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to think about the future. Not the next contract, not the next kill, but the days and years to come. What did I want my life to be? A never-ending hunt, or something more? The city stretched out before me, a labyrinth of the lost and the living. I had been a beacon of death, a harbinger of the end for so many. But maybe, just maybe, I could be something else. Maybe I could find a new path, one that led to redemption, or at least to peace. I started walking, my steps uncertain but my direction clear. I was no longer the hunter, nor was I the hunted. I was just Alex Mercer, a man who had seen too much, fought too hard, and lost too much. But I was still here, still breathing, still able to choose. And that had to count for something. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as Carl Robinson slowly woke from his deep sleep. Another day had come at Sunny Pines Retirement Community, and it was time for Carl's daily routine. He stretched and swung his legs over the side of the bed, groaning at the familiar creaking of his joints. At 75 years old, his body didn't move as easily as it once did, but staying active was important. After dressing and making his bed with military precision, Carl pulled back the curtains to see the dew-covered lawns greeting the new day. In the distance, the wall and guardhouse that encircled the community stood watch, keeping the unknown outside world at bay. Within those walls, over 200 senior residents like himself lived out their golden years with a sense of comfort and security. Or so Carl had thought. Today, something seemed off. An unease rose in his stomach that he couldn't yet place. Shaking his head to dismiss it as silly paranoia, Carl made his way to the cafeteria for breakfast. The aroma of scrambled eggs and bacon greeted him as he stepped inside the large dining hall. Dozens of round tables were occupied by chatting neighbors enjoying their morning meal. Carl paused, scanning the faces for one person in particular. Where was Elaine? She was always among the first to breakfast, eager to spread the latest gossip over coffee. Her chair at their usual table sat empty, an unwelcome sight. Carl fetched his food and sat down with Elaine's friend Margaret instead. "Have you seen Elaine this morning?" he asked between bites. Margaret frowned and shook her head. "No, dear, I thought she was sleeping in. You know how she likes her beauty rest." An itching under Carl's skin told him something was wrong. Elaine was never one to miss a meal, let alone gossip time. With a murmured excuse, he left his half-eaten breakfast and hurried to Elaine's room down the hall. He knocked loudly. "Elaine? Are you in there?" No answer. Trying the doorknob found it unlocked, so Carl entered slowly, bracing himself for what he might find. At first glance, all seemed normal. Then Carl's gaze fell upon the bed, and his heart stopped. Elaine lay there motionless, her eyes glassy and staring at nothing. Dried blood stained her mouth and hands. As Carl crept closer in horror, Elaine let out an inhuman growl and launched herself at him with jaws snapping. He fell backward with a cry, arms raised to shield his vulnerable neck from those deadly teeth. This wasn't Elaine anymore. Those eyes held no recognition, only savage hunger. With a strength he didn't know she had, the creature that was once his friend pinned Carl beneath her slighter frame. He struggled wildly, hands wrapping around her throat to keep the ravaging jaws at bay. Her fingers clawed at his wrists, breaking the skin, as she snarled and choked. Just when Carl felt he couldn't hold on any longer, a surge of adrenaline coursed through him. With a roar, he heaved the monster off and sent it crashing into the nightstand, splintering the wood. Then he ran as fast as his aging legs could carry him, not looking back even as chilling screeches echoed down the hall. Heart pounding, Carl slammed and locked the door to his own room. Leaning against it weakly, he assessed his injuries, shallow cuts and what would surely be nasty bruises. But he was alive. Barely. What in God's name had just happened? Elaine had attacked him, like a wild animal driven mad. Yet she had still seemed partially human too, not completely mindless. Trying to make sense of it all gave Carl a splitting headache. All he knew was the community was no longer safe, and whatever had happened to Elaine was spreading rapidly if her inhuman strength was any indication. Survival instincts long dormant now screamed at him, he had to get out, had to warn the others before it was too late. If such a thing was even possible anymore. Carl paced his room anxiously, jumping at every creak and groan that sounded too close for comfort. His mind raced with questions that had no answers. What was happening to the residents of Sunny Pines? Why had Elaine attacked him with such vicious ferocity? And more pressingly, was he truly safe alone in his room, or should he make a run for it while he still could? A loud crash from down the hall jolted Carl from his panicked musings. Muffled noises of struggle and what sounded horribly like tearing flesh and bone followed. He cracked open his door cautiously to see the source of the commotion. Two figures grappled in front of one of the rooms, locked in a desperate battle. One was Mr. Henderson from down the block, or what remained of the man. His mouth and chin glistened a deep crimson as he gnashed teeth at the other. The second fighter managed to throw Mr. Henderson to the ground, but not before the ravaged body sank its jaws into an exposed forearm. Shrieking, Margaret tore herself away, grasping the bloody wound as her neighbor convulsed on the floor. But Mr. Henderson was already getting back up, eyes bright with an insatiable frenzy. Margaret stumbled away, no longer screaming, just panting in agony and terror. Her injury slowed her escape as the abandoned creature gained once more. Carl watched, frozen in horror, as Mr. Henderson caught up to Margaret. With ruthless efficiency, it bore her to the floor and began mercilessly tearing at her flesh. The noises that followed will haunt Carl to his dying day, wet chewing and slurping that could only mean one gruesome thing. When Mr. Henderson finally ambled away, sated for the moment, all that was left of Margaret were tattered clothes dusted with crimson and a few strewn bones picked completely clean. Trembling, Carl shut his door as quietly as possible. This madness had already consumed too many. He sank to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest and trying to steady his frenzied breathing. Deep down, he knew, these were no longer his friends and neighbors afflicted by some mysterious plague. They were the living dead, preying upon anything with a heartbeat like rabid animals. All those horror stories told around campfires took on a terrible ring of truth. The retirement home had become a death trap, and Carl was trapped within its walls. He had to escape, had no choice but to fight his way out against impossible odds. Grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall, Carl took a few steadying breaths and unlocked his door, bracing himself for the fight of his life. What greeted his eyes froze his blood all over again. Down the hall, at least a dozen formerly innocent faces now shambled towards the commotion, drawn by the scent of fresh meat and blood. Some moved with frightening swiftness despite torn limbs, while others dragged uselessly behind. But they all had one common goal: to feed. And Carl was the only warm body in sight. Gripping the extinguisher like a lifeline, he backed away slowly from the approaching horde. His retreat was cut off as more figures emerged from side rooms, blocking his escape. Carl was surrounded on all sides by the undead, friends, neighbors, all lost to this madness. There would be no mercy from these ravaged creatures. With a resigned sob, Carl raised his weapon high and steeled himself for the coming onslaught. "Come and get it, you soulless bastards!" he screamed defiantly into the fray. The first zombie lunged at Carl with outstretched claws, half its face hanging loose, revealing glistening mandibles grinding hungrily. Carl swung with all his might, caving in the ruined skull with a sickening crack. He had no time to feel remorse or nausea, immediately shifting to block diving bites from the sides. Again and again he bashed decaying bodies away from his fragile flesh, fighting with a strength and ferocity he never knew he possessed. Blood splattered the walls as Carl fended off the unending attacks. More kept emerging from the depths of Sunny Pines, called to the battle. His weapon flew apart under the relentless onslaught, leaving Carl battered and weaponless against a sea of snapping jaws. Retreating slowly, he grabbed a fallen chair to use as an impromptu shield. But Carl was tiring, and the dead pressed ever closer. Just when he resigned himself to his fate, a brilliant flash of light behind the horde caught his attention. Fire! Beautiful, cleansing fire roared down the hallway, consuming ravenous corpses where they stood. Mesmerized, Carl didn't notice the hand clutching his shirt until it yanked him violently backwards into a nearby room. He found himself gazing into the stern yet caring eyes of Mr. Thompson, holding a still-lit torch. "Come on, son, we have to get you to safety before more of them come," the elderly man said gruffly, helping Carl stand on shaky legs. For now, the two survivors were safe behind a locked door. But outside, an inhuman chorus of hatred and hunger rose into the night, calling for fresh meat. Carl knew deep in his soul, this was only the beginning. Days passed in a blur for Carl as he hid with Thompson in the confined space of the maintenance room. Between bouts of restless slumber, they spoke in hushed tones of what had transpired and what little they knew of the horrors that now prowled Sunny Pines. Thompson regaled tales of narrowly escaping shambling husks of neighbors with flaming brands, fighting his way to Carl's aid. From the little food they risked scavenging, Carl slowly recovered his strength. His wounds sealed into thick scabs itching beneath bandages. But outside, An endless moan rose and fell like the tides, a constant reminder they were far from safe. Thompson guessed well over half the residents had fallen victim by now, turning into the ravening creatures. Only a handful may still cling to life like rats in a sinking ship. On the third night, Thompson shook Carl from a fitful doze. "We need more supplies before they find a way in," he whispered grimly, passing a makeshift spear fashioned from a mop handle. Carl nodded, heart racing as they unlocked the door a crack to peer through. The coast seemed clear for the moment, so together they slipped from their hideaway into the gloomy corridor beyond. Shadows seemed to writhe and distort at the edges of Carl's vision as they picked their way through the ruins of Sunny Pines. Abandoned rooms held only remnants of life, flung clothing, scattered medications, bits of bone. Nothing remained of their former inhabitants. A tingle shot up Carl's spine at every creak or groan, phantom shapes emerging from the darkness only to vanish as quickly. They scoured the abandoned dining hall first, stuffing pouches with anything sealed or dry that looked edible still. Thompson stood guard at the doorway while Carl rummaged, senses straining for any sound of the living dead. A clatter made both jump before realizing it was only a dropcan rolling away. Their heartbeats slowed, but the feeling of being watched did not fade. A scraping broke the eerie stillness down the hall. Two figures emerged from the gloom, moving with a shambling lurch as half-rotten legs dragged uselessly behind. One was Mr. Davis, face a ruined mess of tooth marks and dried blood. The other bore no features Carl recognized at all beneath layers of gore and mildew. A horrific moan rose from Davis's swollen throat as dead eyes found fresh meat only yards away. Thompson swung first, spearpoint taking Davis under the jaw and punching up through what remained of his skull in a spray of rancid fluids. Retreating backwards, Carl swung wildly at the second creature clutching at his shirt with worm-ridden fingers. The makeshift club connected solidly, caving in its rotting crown. Their escape was cut off as more answers the moans, emerging from doorways like nightmares given flesh. Thompson shoved Carl ahead. "Run, boy, now!" he bellowed, standing his ground against the tide. Carl fled as fast as his aching joints allowed, the sounds of scuffling and impact fading behind. Guilt and dread warred within for abandoning the only ally left in this hell. But survival called him onward into the shadows alone once more. Days blended into each other as Carl moved like a ghost through the ruins. He learned to avoid open spaces and move primarily at night, the dead seeming drawn by light and noise during daylight. Every crevice and forgotten area was explored, yielding what meager sustenance could be found. Slowly, Carl was whittled down, cuts leakadlessly, ribs jutting sharply against thin skin. Still he persisted on whatever frantic energy remained. To give up was to fail, to turn, and he refused to end as one of those soulless husks. Exhaustion and hunger finally caught up to Carl as he limped the hallways one gray morning. A groan made him whirl, heart in his throat, to see a robed figure lurching out of the shadows. It wore the tattered remains of a priest's garb, face a featureless ruin dripping rotten flesh. Carl backed away slowly, fumbling for the makeshift blade strapped to his wrist. But his legs betrayed him, vision graying as darkness closed in. Warmth and light pulled Carl from the abyss of unconsciousness sometime later. His wounds had been dressed, hunger somewhat abated, though his rescuer was nowhere to be seen. A note in shaky script sat by a candle read, "Only others have found refuge below. Follow the light when you are able." Clutching this small ray of hope, Carl gathered what strength remained and followed flickering torchlight into the unknown depths below. The light led Carl down twisting stairways and maintenance tunnels he never knew existed beneath Sunny Pines. Each cautious step echoed in the close quarters, a beacon for any things that may lurk in the dark. His sensitive ears strained for any sound of pursuit, but only distant dripping and his own ragged breaths met them. Deeper and deeper he descended into the earth, clinging to the lone torch like a lifeline. At last, voices murmuring in hushed tones guided Carl around a final bend. A heavy metal door barred his way, subsiding gratefully against the solid barrier. The slot slid open, revealing a single wary eye before the locks disengaged. Bright light assaulted Carl's vision as the door creaked inward to reveal an oasis beyond all hope. At least 24 survivors huddled in the vast bomb shelter, tending wounded, rationing supplies. They swarmed Carl with questions and offerings of warm food that he devoured ravenously. His rescuer, an elderly nurse named Helen, tended Carl's lingering injuries with practiced care. Only a few more still prowled the upper levels, she explained gravely, cutting off any escape. They would have to be eliminated if any hope to leave this tomb alive. That night, Carl slept more deeply than he had in weeks, nestled in a bunk amidst companions once more. But he did not forget their dire circumstances, and awoke with renewed purpose. Finding Helen, he volunteered to help clear their path to freedom above. The hardened survivors readily supplied Carl and a few others with makeshift weapons from their storerooms. It was time to take the fight back to the dead. Under cover of darkness, the ragtag group stealthily made their way up rickety ladders. Carl led the attack with a shocking ferocity born of his ordeal, bashing any ambushers aside with ruthless efficiency and no room for mercy or hesitation. Slowly but surely they reclaimed lost ground, following signs of infestation, stripped rooms, scattered remains, moans in the shadows. At every turn Carl guided them true, remembering each nook and cranny the living dead may inhabit. A final tunnel emptied into moonlit wilderness beyond the outer gate. But the dead were not done yet. A massive mass of sloughing flesh and rotten bone lurched into view, drawn by sounds of slaughter, all that remained of nearly 36 corpses amalgamated into one mountain of malignant flesh. Its multitude of sundered jaws gnashed and moaned insatiably. This abomination would not be so easily felled. Carl's companions scattered before the Titan, weapons useless against such a construct of decay. But he stood his ground, sizing up their foe's weaknesses. When it charged with impossible speed, he dove aside nimbly for its small size. Scraping shank against concrete, Carl showered sparks into a growing pile of oily rags and tinder he had gathered, dousing it all in fuel. As the monster rounded on him again, he roared in challenge and lit the fuse. An inferno exploded into being, engulfing the composite corpse utterly. Its unearthly shrieks echoed to the stars as flames consumed dead flesh down to ashes. At last, silence fell once more over the ruins of Sunny Pines. Carl stood amidst the flames, silhouetted against the dancing orange glow like some vengeful spirit of retribution. Finally, it was over. His companions emerged to embrace Carl in awe and relief. They had reclaimed their home and lives from the edge of the abyss. As the survivors began rebuilding safe spaces above with Carl's guidance, he gazed up at a brightening dawn. A new day had come, and with it uncertain futures beyond these sheltering walls. But whatever challenges lay out in that unknown world, Carl would face them, resilient, untamed, and very much alive. As the Titanic P sailed across calm waters, the gentle rocking of the cruise ship put John to sleep. He woke up to the cool breeze from the ocean coming through his window. Mary was still soundly asleep next to him in their soft cabin, and he smiled as he stretched. The morning sun made her soft features shine. He couldn't wait to spend 3 weeks at sea with his wife, away from the stress of his finance job for what seemed like a lifetime. He was determined to enjoy every moment of this special vacation. John woke Mary up with a kiss after getting ready for the day. "Good morning, sleepyhead. It's time to get up and enjoy all the perks our tickets give us." She smiled shyly and nodded as they walked out the door together. The polished mahogany halls seemed to sparkle as you walked past the intricate details and tasteful art. They were buzzing with the happy energy of vacationers having fun. Sounds of laughter and happiness could be heard everywhere. When John got to the top deck, he gasped in amazement at the view of the ocean. No signs of the concrete jungle he used to live could be seen. In its place was a huge blue paradise that went on for miles. The cool breeze from the sea messed up his hair and made him feel deeply free. Mary squeezed his arm and let out a happy, amazed glow from the strange feeling of being suspended above the unpredictable deep. She said, "This is a dream come true. Thank you for making it happen, darling." John pulled her close because they were both high on their sudden freedom. "Anything for you, my love. Let's get something to eat before we see what else Titanic P has to offer." He led the way to the Lido Cafe, where a feast for the eyes was on show. As they filled their plates, a musty smell remained beneath the tempting smells. John thought it was just his overactive imagination and dug in with gusto. Nothing could stop him from looking forward to a relaxing vacation in paradise. After breakfast, the two of them went to check out the fancy services. The clear blue water in the glass-domed swimming pools made them look stunning. Spas with lots of money offered deep relaxation. There were so many things to do that it seemed like there was something for everyone, from dance classes to quiz nights. John stood still as Mary dragged him into the fancy casino. Dust was flying around in the sun. "Not my thing, dear," he croaked, feeling uneasy for no reason. With a laugh, she brushed it off and faded into the hypnotic glow of the slot machines. John saw that other guests were hacking and coughing more than usual as the day went on. Tired eyes were covered with dark circles, and energetic leaps were replaced by stumbling steps. When he heard a panicked yell coming from the cabin next door, he rushed in and saw a big man shaking wildly on the floor before stopping. "Call the medic!" John screamed, but his face showed that he wasn't sure what was going on. Something was clearly wrong. This was not a normal sickness. Over the PA system, the captain asked all travelers in a serious tone to report any symptoms right away. There were rumors that a virus was spreading quickly through the lower floors. John rubbed his tired face, and his extreme fear was making him lose his mind. He had to find Mary and protect her from all of this chaos. When he got back to their room quickly, he screamed in pain when he saw her throwing up furiously in the toilet. Through a cloud of pain, her sunken features barely recognized him. She whimpered, "Please. Help," and then fell into his shaking arms. John carefully took Mary's lifeless body to the medical center. Each sharp step cut him to the core. The hallway outside was lined with bodies, with blankets pulled over their bent bodies to try to keep their dignity. A frantic nurse quickly led him inside, but her caring eyes told him what was really going on. He put Mary down on a thin cushion and tried not to cry when she cried out in pain. "I promise you'll be okay, my love," he whispered, holding her hand as if to bring life back to her tired eyes. It felt like hours went by in a rush. They told John many times to leave Mary's side for his own safety, but he wouldn't. Finally, a doctor came out and took off his bloody gloves with a sigh of resignation. "For now, she is safe, but the virus is doing a lot of damage to her body. There is no cure, we can only deal with the signs as best we can. It's time to say goodbye. In case." The bad news made him weak in the knees, and the thought of living without his partner shook his mind. "No," he growled, "I won't give up on her," and he held Mary tighter, as if that were the only thing that could keep her spirit from leaving. There was a lot of chaos in the infirmary, with techs in hazmat suits rushing between crying patients. One man growled and struck at a nurse, putting his teeth just inches from her throat before being put to sleep with tranquilizers. The fight made a terrible crunch sound and then strange moans. John shook and turned away, his throat getting dry and making bile rise. This nightmare was getting worse faster than any medicine could fix. He had to do whatever it took to get Mary to safety. John put Mary in a wheelchair, bribed a nurse with his valuable watch, and then sneaked out of the morbid ward while things were still a mess. Along the poorly lit hallways, the smell of sickness got stronger, and sounds of pain could be heard coming from every metal door. A thin couple leaned against a wall and coughed up black ooze as sores and bruises ate away at their bodies. One let out a gruff warning sound and then shook again. As he ran by, he tried to block out their blank stares so that his nerve wouldn't break. John took big gulps of ocean air as he stood on the open deck and desperately held on to Mary as a strong wind whipped around them. He looked around for a way out with tears in his eyes and saw utility stairs hidden at the far end. His sore muscles screamed in anger every time he took a painful step down a narrow passageway. Moans could be heard from everywhere. The dim emergency lights barely made it through the darkness, and his hands hurt from pulling Mary below decks for hours on end. When John finally found a storage room, he locked them inside with a shaking fist. John's already tense nerves were completely fried when he fell to the floor. Mary whimpered and shivered next to him. Her pale skin stuck to her bones. He held her close and whispered comforting words, perhaps because his own hope was fading as well. His tired mind wouldn't let him sleep, and his constant alertness turned every creak into a scary sign. Food and drink were hard to come by, but he shared out what little was left, hoping it would last them a while longer. As Mary got weaker, the days turned into a fog of fear, and people around them seemed to fall apart. On the third day, there was a quiet disturbance outside. I found a handgun among the supplies, and John cocked it. He steadied his shaking hands and vowed to protect his loved one no matter what. 2 pairs of boots came closer and stopped outside the door. "Oh, please." A girl squeaked with fear in her voice, "Help. I do not want to die and am alone." John had to risk one last act of faith in another person even though his gut told him to betray them. When he cracked open the door, he saw a teenage girl and a rough-looking cook. They said their names were Amanda and Brian. He yelled, "Come in quickly, before they see us. We might be stronger when we're together after all." Over the next few days, the closet turned into a safe place to hide from the terrible events happening outside. John took care of Mary as best he could while they met their new friends. Amanda talked about how she was on the trip by herself after her parents got divorced, looking for a way to escape in Titanic P's bright lights. Brian mostly looked on with a skeptical eye and would sometimes use military slang that caught John's attention. As Mary's health got worse, the chef was in charge of dividing up the few goods that were left. He thought they had only about a week before they started to die of hunger. Any noise the ship made, no matter how small, felt like the end of the world, and it made nerves even more frayed. John grabbed his wife's weak hand and begged her to hold on for a little while longer. As the disease spread, he had to keep hope that someone would save them. At night, a painful scream echoed down the hallway and was cut off by a terrible crunch. John woke up quickly and grabbed his gun. He looked at Brian with a serious face. Amanda, who was curled up in the corner and shivering despite the tropical heat, caught sad looks. "They can smell us," she sobbed. "It will happen soon." John felt the need to guard them again. He knew they couldn't stay hidden in this falling apart metal tomb forever. They had to fight the enemy or give up like rats trapped in a corner. At dawn, they put together their simple weapons, which included steel pipes, homemade torches, and John's old sidearm. Brian quickly mapped out possible routes that he thought would have the fewest infected people, making note of strategic choke points that would stop attacks in their tracks. His skill showed in his speech, which sent chills down John's spine. "What do you not want to say?" He made a weak offer. The other man sighed and took off his hat, showing scars that went all the way across his shaved head. "As a bioweapons expert, I used to get paid to make people have bad dreams. I'm sorry that one of my monsters has you caught." When they said it, there was stunned silence. Amanda stared in shock as John struggled to hold back his anger as memories of his late brother erupted in accusations. "You evil thing!" he screamed through clenched teeth. Brian hung his head because he couldn't argue with the verdict. A cough from Mary broke the strain and brought John back to the current problem. "The bad things you did can wait," he spat. "Right now, you're our best chance of making it out alive. Show the way." The cook gave a stiff nod and pushed the barrier open. Their trip into the Stygian depths was a scary blur of sneaking around and fighting. Brian showed that he was a fighter by killing his attackers so quickly and brutally that the walls turned red. John focused on keeping Mary and Amanda, who were weak, out of harm's way while his gun went off in defense. They were so desperate that they were as mean as animals when they faced the hordes of dead eyes, hacking off limbs to put up a wall between prey and attacker. They made it through a maze of winding hallways and out onto an upper passenger deck where there was blood and damage. The once opulent furniture was covered in dead bodies that were breaking down in pools of stinky rot. Nearby, a hoarse voice croaked. John turned around and saw Captain Smythe slouched against the bar, his guts spilling out of a huge wound. Along with the last breath. "Starboard, escape pods," he choked and coughed up black ooze. Like the armies of the dead, his eyes got cloudy. When John heard the news, his hope was sparked again. They could get away if they could just get to the pods in time. Grabbing Mary even tighter, he used the captain's last will and testament to rally Amanda and Brian with renewed zeal. They rushed together to safety, the dying Titanic P's groans ringing in the harsh sea as they knew they were going to die. They were close to freedom, but they had to run faster than the monsters that were after them. John led their ragged group to the escape pod bay one painful step at a time. Muscles that had been hurt felt pain with every step on the slippery floors. Mary did everything she could to keep up, but her weak exterior hid a strong heart that wouldn't give up. Behind them, Amanda shuffled, supporting a hurt leg while firmly holding on to her youthful energy. Bringing up the rear, Brian carefully covered their side with alert eyes and a stone-cold calm as the chaos got closer. As they came around the last turn, the pods appeared in front of them like shining guardians. John yelled with joy and charged forward, but when he got there, he stopped in horror. A crowd of twisted monsters blocked the doorway, their swords covering torn hazmat suits. Their rough breathing sounded like death rattles, and their crazy eyes were fixed on fresh food with wild hunger. With their guns firing at the same time, Brian and John began a desperate attack to cut a path through the teeth-gnashing jaws and flailing limbs. As the battle went on, Amanda carefully watched over Mary, her gun shaking but ready to defend her. Brian's arm was almost torn off by the blast, but he threw a bomb into the group with a growl. A horrible rain of blood and flesh burst outwards, making a way for the survivors to get out. "Take Mary with you and leave." The ex-soldier yelled and reloaded quickly as if it were second nature. John gave his lover one last hug and kiss on the pale forehead. "We're almost free now, sweetheart. Hold on a little longer." As they rushed into the small pod, Brian put out the fire by slamming the door shut and the claws on the metal. Cold, steady beeps surrounded them and made them feel safe and tense as launch routines ended. As Mary's effort to breathe got weaker, John held her close and whispered comforting words. He wanted his love to shine into her eyes. "Do not leave me now. Damn, we made it this far." He choked back tears. Beyond the porthole, Titanic P's huge body shook from some terrible stress. The pod was shook by a loud blast, and sickness rose as inertia took over. They jumped off the sinking ship like a cork and spun around crazily until the stabilizers kicked in. When it stopped moving, John gasped when he saw that his once safe place was completely destroyed. There were pieces of burning rubble falling where the Grand Liner had been just moments before. Its insides poured out into the deep in a horrible graveyard, leaving only a growing pool of toxic sludge to remember the living and the dead. On an emergency band, one last message came through: "Attention survivors. Stay away from everyone. The virus is spread by bodily fluids. Whole cities got sick. Governments have fallen. Be careful out there." The pod was dead quiet as that awful ending sank in. They had lost all sense of normalcy or kindness, and they were the only ones left in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. John could feel Mary's weak heartbeat stuttering under his fingers. As her flaxen eyelashes fluttered open, he felt a wave of bittersweet relief. "Oh, dear." He choked up, "We made it." She gave him one last kiss on the stubbled cheek with a weak smile as the light faded from her green eyes. "No. Please don't leave me," he cried as he held her dead body in his arms and his last bit of strength ran out. Mary was taken away by gentle hands and laid down with great care. John looked up through a fog and saw Amanda's teary eyes. Then he saw Brian's calm gaze, which made him feel better without words. The chef swore angrily, "We'll give her a proper send-off. Right now, just try to make it through another day, that's what she'd want." John joined them at the small window and looked out at the endless blue space that seemed to go on forever into the unknown distance. Anything was possible out here, from life and death to salvation. He promised to respect Mary's memory by keeping going even when things looked hopeless, no matter what enemies were waiting for them on the waves. The future was still unknown, but they would face any storms that came their way together. As a botanist, I've always had an affinity for plants. Their gentle, rhythmic growth, the way they reached for the sun. It was poetic, even in this post-apocalyptic world where the undead roamed the streets, hungry for the flesh of the living. My name is Claire. Finding food became our daily battle. When everything started, the cities were raided, supermarkets emptied, and the countryside ransacked. Hope was a rare commodity, much like food. My group consisted of 10 friends, acquaintances, and some strangers turned allies in the face of the apocalypse. One fateful day, while scavenging an old, almost forgotten town, I stumbled upon a wonder, an enormous greenhouse, still intact. Inside, rows of vibrant, green plants flourished under the glass ceiling. Tomatoes, beans, lettuce. It was like finding Eden in hell. The group rejoiced, it felt like a lifeline. After checking the perimeter for zombies, we camped there, and the following day, we feasted. We all consumed the plants, except for a few who were suspicious. By nightfall, the world changed once again, and not for the better. That evening, Mark, once a jovial comedian, grew irate, throwing fits and yelling. Lisa, the group's medic, started hallucinating, seeing zombies where there were none. By midnight, our sanctuary became a battleground. Half the group, driven mad by whatever was in those plants, attacked us. It was brutal. Friends we'd been with since the outbreak began, torn from humanity once by the undead, and now, again by some botanical nightmare. Searching for answers, I delved into the greenhouse's office and found old, dust-covered research papers. The plants were genetically modified, treated with an experimental hormone designed to boost growth and resilience. But it had side effects, severe hallucinations, violent tendencies, and a ravenous hunger. We had unknowingly consumed a botanical time bomb. I shared my findings with the remaining sane members. We needed to destroy the greenhouse, ensuring no one else faced its horrors. But by now, the noise had attracted a horde of zombies. They pressed against the glass walls, their grotesque faces hungry for us. In a moment of clarity, I knew what I had to do. I'd ensure the survival of the few left. Grabbing containers of plant fertilizer and accelerants, I planned to burn the greenhouse, taking the tainted plants, the affected group members, and the approaching zombies with it. I instructed the unaffected to leave immediately, heading north where we'd heard rumors of a safe haven. Tears in their eyes, they left reluctantly, knowing they were leaving me behind. I lit a flare, its red glow illuminating the night. Throwing accelerant all around, I could see the shadowy figures of my once friends approaching, their eyes void of recognition. The zombies outside pounded harder on the glass. With a deep breath, I dropped the flare. The greenhouse erupted in flames. The roaring fire consumed everything, drawing in the undead like moths to a light. I felt the searing heat, the pain, but it was short-lived, overshadowed by the hope that my sacrifice would give the remaining survivors a fighting chance. The flames danced higher, the world growing dim, but in my heart, a small seed of hope continued to grow, hoping that humanity would one day flourish once more. The salty sea breeze tousled my hair as I stepped onto the grandiose deck of the Sapphire Serenade. After months of gray days and emotional pain from my divorce, this cruise promised a fresh beginning, a horizon unmarred by the past. For the first 2 days, life on board was a dream. There were pools, gourmet dinners, and laughter echoing down the ship's gilded hallways. One evening, while watching the sunset, I met Elise and her daughter, Lily. They were a beam of light, helping me forget my sorrows. Elise was running away from her own set of problems, and Lily, with her infectious giggle, became the heart of our small group. It was on the third day that whispers of illness began. An elderly passenger was rushed to the infirmary, pale and sweating. By nightfall, 10 more joined him. Waking up the next morning, the ship had changed. Alarmed cries echoed. Passengers were panicking, barricading themselves in their rooms. The cruise staff tried to maintain order, but fear was contagious. The elderly man who was first taken to the infirmary? He had died. And then, he woke up, but not in the way any of us would have wished. The serene vacation became a brutal fight for survival. Hallways that once gleamed with luxury now dripped with blood and gore. Every corner held a threat, every shadow could be an undead passenger. Elise, Lily, and I moved carefully, scavenging for food and weapons. One evening, as we hid in a dining hall, a group of zombies stumbled in. We held our breath, but Lily's soft sob gave us away. What followed was a blur. We fought fiercely, but in the end, it was a kitchen knife and a fire extinguisher that saved us. Amid the chaos, I formulated a plan. There were lifeboats. If we could just reach one, we might escape this floating nightmare. But as we navigated the ship, it was evident that others had the same idea. Most of the lifeboats were gone, save for one, dangling precariously off the side. As we reached the deck, our worst fears came true. A horde of zombies blocked our path. We couldn't fight them all. There was no way out. And then, realization hit. If the zombies had something else to focus on, Elise and Lily could escape. Tears streamed down Elise's face as I explained my plan. "Promise me you'll keep her safe," I told her, handing over my weapons. Pushing them towards the lifeboat, I shouted and flailed, gaining the attention of every undead creature. I ran in the opposite direction, leading them away. The further I ran, the more joined the chase. A quick glance over my shoulder showed Elise and Lily lowering the lifeboat. The undead were close, their putrid breath on my neck. I could hear Elise's cries, Lily's screams. But I kept running. The last thing I saw was the vast ocean, shimmering under the moonlight. Before the zombies descended. Away from the ship, Elise and Lily drifted. Tears stained their faces, but they held on to hope. Lily clutched a photograph, one taken on our first day on the cruise, a reminder of the man who had sacrificed himself for her safety. In the vastness of the ocean, the Sapphire Serenade became a speck, a floating tomb of horror and despair. But on a small lifeboat, two survivors sailed forth, carrying the memory of a hero who had given them a second chance at life.